heartfelt words. And worth maybe some more consideration on our part. This is a very busy time of the year. It will be very easy to stay wound up in the busyness of the day and your various obligations at work and in between, and also try and divide for some social time and personal time. I highly recommend you guys to really take advantage of this day of the week. Mm-hmm. And not view it as another busy schedule day, but as a day of respite. And did I get you there?
No, I was just writing a poem last night, and I was trying to remember that word.
The word?
Yes, and I could not.
I just loved how your face went right.
I couldn't remember what it was, so. But the poem's over, so it's too late.
I like it. Well, you can rewrite it. Hey, Andy, you doing okay?
Yep. Just have to get the hours off to the payroll people.
You look like you've had some hours off of you.
I saw it firsthand last night. Working till
Let's bless our brother. Come over here, Andy. Let me put my hand on you. Lord, I thank you for this brother. Lord, for his dedication and all that he does at home, at work, and before you. Lord, I know there's a lot of, I guess I could call it, toil and struggle before your throne so often. And I pray for peace and rest, that he would know the joy of your presence, and that your presence is with him even in the busyness. Call that to remembrance in the times of pressure, deadline, and overwhelming state, that you are there too. You're not separate from him. Those aren't things that he has to accomplish without you, but those are things that you come alongside him in and through. Thank you so much for his life, the fellowship that he brings as a son in your house, the joy of walking together with him and his family, restoration to his body, to his soul, and strength to his spirit, in Jesus' name. Amen. Seriously, let's really take advantage of this time and approach it. Your attitude and approach to a day of fellowship, this should be considered a day of fellowship. Should be one of, I'm not trying to tell you how to think or make you think in a certain way, but this is in all the busyness that we have, which is overwhelming for sure. We also have enough control over our schedule to set a day apart like this. And so don't allow other desires to infringe on this time. Be jealous for this time. You personally. I would submit to you that you should be jealous for this time, looking forward to it. I know you have some other times, that you guys gather as young people and here, this group here, and then separately as some of the guys and the young ladies as well. Those, I don't want to say should be, as if you should feel obligated toward them. I say should be as, wow, this is something that you have an opportunity to take part of. And so, and neither are these times separate from or as if you're turning a switch on and off in your relationship to and walk with the Lord and one another. The environment changes, the responsibilities of the moment may change, but your purpose in life, God's purpose for his people, a wisdom applied in the various situations of life and relationships of life, that stuff never changes. Here we have, in essence, I don't want to call it a safe place, but a very well-protected environment in which much of what we have to do to protect our mind, our heart, and our spirit in the other activities of life can be thinned out and loosened up a little bit so that we can be more receptive to one another and to the Lord. That's something that, and it's a shared experience. So you guys get to share portions when you're working with one another and doing things, but here we have a way to share something as a community. And so I would submit that the exhale of the busyness should come prior to coming to this place, so that you can come here with a peaceful mind and a clear conscience. And if there is some matter or for some reason that you are unable to have a clear conscience, either within yourself or toward someone else, work diligently to settle that and make peace before God and with man before you come here. And if you're unable to do that, then make it the first priority. So it's okay to take somebody outside or into another room and make things right. And I'm not suggesting even that you guys are holding anything with one another. But if there's something that's a burden on you in such a way, even if it's not interpersonal, relationally related, something that's a real burden to your heart, you need to express that. Some things are appropriate to be expressed in a community and in fellowship, and some things are more appropriate to be expressed toward a trusted one in the Lord, in the Spirit. But don't wait for those things. God doesn't bring those types of burdens to your heart without purpose. So do not think, well, I just need to carry that on my own, or I shouldn't burden someone else with that. That's actually one of the great benefits of the body, is that we share one another's burdens. But that you need to be prudent about your sharing. You know, there are some things that you don't share in certain settings. There are certain things that you share only with one who God has entrusted for that type of concern or burden in life. And then there are others that are very relevant to what is common to every believer. And so to share in that context is not just a sharing, hey, I have something to share. It is something that is an equal give and take that is as a benefit to the body. And you may think, well, sharing a burden is not a benefit. Well, you can be benefited by the ministry of others toward you in that burden, and they can be benefited by carrying the burden with you, because it's a shared burden that all in the body experience at one time or another, sometimes at the same time. So let's be very intentional about that. The season has started, and that's good. Don't be intimidated by it. You know, take a hold of it, but take hold more firmly the substance and the root of your faith and what you live for. And let that be the driver and initiator for everything that you do in life, at home, at work, in your social interaction, and of course here. Let's not be dual-minded, half-hearted, or living in doubt and unbelief. Be wholehearted and clean, having a clean conscience in all that you do. It's going to change the way you live your life, really will. And don't anticipate what's ahead too much. Scripture says it like this: don't worry about your future. That worry will sour your day. It will sour entire seasons of your life. And you literally don't need to worry about it. How does the scripture say that? No man by worrying has added a single day to his life. Modern day studies have shown that from a physiological standpoint, worry actually reduces the days of your life. But that's not something that was hidden from God when that wisdom was shared. Release the burdens. Jesus, in the same context, says, come unto me, all of you who are weary and heavy laden. Lay down the worries of your life. Take up my burdens. Be burdened for what I'm burdened for. Carry with me the load that I bear. And that is to be as a fellow son in God's house. For my burden is easy. It's true. It's not true if you believe it. It's true even if you don't believe it. But it becomes reality when you put the truth to practice. Truth that is not practiced, faith that is not tested and put into action, is not faith at all. It's a concept in your mind, but it's not a reality. Where did we leave off?
I
17?
think.
I think might
We
be
jumped
on-
I think
ahead.
it's 13, 19, because I think we did
Oh, that's
18 and
right.
then we went back and did 17. I think we're on 19. I think.
I don't think we've done 18
No,
yet.
Yeah, we haven't done
No,
18.
I
So it's 18 and 19 that we haven't done. Okay.
Yeah.
did we not go?
We did
straight from
17, but not
16?
17, and we jumped to 20.
Oh, we jumped to.
I think
Yeah,
we did
reference.
16 and then we did 20 and then we went back to 17. So now we're going to do 18
Gotcha.
and 19.
Okay.
Just to make it not confusing. Okay.
Gotcha.
Uh,
I think I read 18 myself. That's where the confusion came from.
Isaac knows he's got all the right notes,
That is true, actually.
but I'm relatively
He'll do
confident that we're at 18.
I'm more
So,
confident in you than I am. in
Benji,
you.
18?
yes,
Mm-hmm.
and Noah the second part of it.
I'm going to go to like here. Where it says helpful. Is also helpful.
Yeah. Oh. Good
It's a little bit of a
question.
longer one.
That's not bad. You can do helpful.
Yeah, that's fine.
The Duke of Xi said to Confucius, "Among my people, there is one we call Upright Gong. When his father stole a sheep, he reported him to the authorities." Confucius replied, "Among my people, those who we consider upright are different from this. Fathers cover up for their sons, and sons cover up for their fathers. Uprightness is to be found in this." This represents the classic statement of the Confucian valuing of familial relations over considerations of public justice that so infuriated the Mohists.
Maoist.
Maoists. No, it's Moists.
Is it
Moists.
Moist? Sorry. Benji, you're
Yeah.
smarter than me.
Well, it's not his, just ignore the H. Moists. And statecraft thinkers such as Anfisi.
Just keep going. Names don't matter. They do. Oh, they don't.
Don't ask Elijah because he'll laugh about it and then say it doesn't matter.
Okay, that is
Hanfeize.
pronounced Hanfeize.
Oh, that's better.
Okay, try again, Benji.
Hanfeize.
Oh,
That's good.
Okay.
Some commentators see this passage as a specific response to Hanfeize, and thus of quite late provenance. But legalist tendencies probably had their beginning in China long before they were systematized by the late warring statecraft theorists. In the Confucian view, proper relations between father and son are the root of goodness. And goodness, rather than the rule of law, is the only way to properly order a state.
Comparing 13:18 to Mencius 7:835 is also helpful. Dao Ying asked, when Shun was serving as the Son of Heaven, and Gao Yao was his minister, if the old blind man, Shun's father, had committed murder, what would have been done? Mencius replied, the old blind man would simply have been apprehended. Would Shun have not prevented it? How could Shun have prevented it? Gao Yao had his rightful duty to perform. So what would Shun have done? Shun would have regarded giving up his rulership of the world no differently than throwing away an old pair of sandals. He would have secretly taken his father on his back and fled into exile, taking up residence somewhere along the coast. There he would have spent the rest of his days, cheerful and happy, with no thoughts of his former kingdom. The emphasis is slightly different here, in that the rightfulness of legal punishment is not denied, but the basic theme is the same. It is the duty of the filial son to sacrifice himself in order to prevent the law from being applied to his father. Alternate versions of the upright gong story in other warring states texts present his fault as an overly developed sense of trustworthiness. Trustworthiness in the sense of fidelity to one's word, being closely allied to uprightness. In his commentary to Mencius 4b11, the great person is not always necessarily true to his word because he is concerned only with rightness. Zhao Qi observes that the fact that rightness sometimes involves not necessarily being true to one's word is shown by the example of son covering up for the father. And the Zhuangzi similarly remarks that upright Gong reporting his father and Wei Xing allowing himself to drown are examples of the dangers of trustworthiness. For other criticisms of the virtue of trustworthiness becoming a vice through excess, see commentary to the following Analects, where the danger of excessive trustworthiness is described as harmful rigidity, and the danger of excessive uprightness as intolerance.
This is a difficult one, I think. But what are your thoughts?
It's kind of a balance of what is considered to be right or wrong. It's obviously very relationally based.
I'm not trying to lay any significant, rule here, which I think that's kind of the point. What's in between is you almost can't determine what's going to happen. You know, clearly it's not saying that nothing should be done or that you shouldn't care about a wrong done by a father or a son. But it's also saying that simply turning it into the state is not necessarily the best solution either. You know, there is justice that is applied. So in the second scenario that's given, where the old man murders somebody and then he flees with his son, or his son takes him on his back and flees in exile. You know, there's still a full separation that takes place. So in our modern judicial system, we feel that the only solution is to be made by the gavel. But that's not necessarily, as we can see, in our criminal justice system, anything that restores life. And it's not that it can't, or that you should get in the way of it, if that's the process that it takes, or that it flows into. Does that make sense? But maybe there's a greater way a more holistic way of dealing with things. So, 2, 1, here, you're maintaining some of the primary relationships in life. But you're losing the rest of what your life was. So that separation takes place. And so, and the other, if the judicial system is initiated, then you don't get in the way of that, in essence. But it's not necessarily the direct solution either. It's kind of an interesting thing to think about. When you visit, if you have, and I don't know that many of you have, if you visited prisons and those who are in essence, the bindings of the law because of crime committed or whatever else, they unfortunately trend toward recommittal of crime more so than they do restoration from criminal behavior. I found in this light, just as a reference, it's kind of an interesting movie from a while back, The Shawshank Redemption, and it's kind of deals with that. The character that Morgan Freeman plays, for decades, he comes before the parole board, and they ask him, "Have you been changed?" Basically, "Oh yeah, I'm a changed man. I'll never do anything like that again." And they deny his parole every time. And then, of course, toward the end of the movie, he basically says, how could I ever change? And this place has changed. This place has had such an impact, and what changes a man, basically. And
Here too long.
yeah, but he basically accepts the culpability of his crime and realizes that there's something in him that can't be dealt with or whatever else, and then that's when they grant him parole. Where the other character, Andy Dufresne or whatever his name is, who was framed or put in prison that wasn't even his fault, then he was fighting against it. Anyway, that's not necessarily the best example because he breaks out of prison and does whatever, but it's a very interesting look into the system. And interestingly, man has not really figured out how to restore man. And there's something that is pointed at here that is fundamentally restorative, and it's the way that we look at certain relationships. So it's not, my point here is not for you to come away with how to deal with certain crimes and trying to hide something or cover something up or anything, but to really look at how to deal with things from a restorative manner. There's also an interesting aspect to this. It's actually in the law of Moses. And when Israel, the Lord, when he dispensed the law to the Israelites, before they went into the promised land, he actually wrote in the law that there would be what they called cities of refuge. And that in the case of murder or accidental death, then the perpetrator or the one who committed the crime could actually flee to one of these cities. Otherwise, and so that he would not be avenged for the blood that he shed. So this is very similar. It became an exile. So if you ever left that city, you guys probably saw this similarly to what just happened, what was shown in the series David, the David TV show, with the younger brother Ishbosheth, who had committed an offense against another family that was actually by Moses' law punishable by death. And so they exercised the provision in the law that basically said, then you must go into exile. So his life was completely changed. He was taken out of the privilege of the palace, and they took him or exiled him to that place. And so you have one that's the execution of the justice part, the judicial part of the law, which is you have to die. And the other is you're exiled in this way. Both are different ways of dealing with something. Does that make sense? And so, obviously, the essence of what's being portrayed in this particular Analect is filial fidelity. The care and grace toward and love given to the parent or between the parent and the child. I think the reason it's a little bit awkward for us is because we think very judiciously. We think in a very, like we need to have the judge put the hammer down and the jury decide what's right or wrong, and under the constraints of the law. And there is certainly an appropriation for that. So there was also in the law of Moses. By the witness of 2 or 3, a man can be condemned. Or also by the witness of 2 or 3, a man can be liberated. So both of these aspects exist in the law of Moses as well. It's just an interesting comparison. Then, of course, there's a couple of principles that are mentioned here directly. One is, 3, filial, am I saying that right? Filial fidelity?
Yeah.
Goodness and trustworthiness are all very principally mentioned here, not just, this is one of those times that we need to be very intentional or careful about how we define those words. Because here, goodness and trustworthiness don't have a contemporary or modern day meaning. They mean something much more than the surface understanding.
I think trustworthiness in this light is an over-consideration or overvaluing of the law and the judicial system in the first place. I like the harmful rigidity because I can envision that trait a lot better, even in the modern context of what that looks like in a person.
Mm-hmm.
With an over obsession with justice, I suppose.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that can consume all of us very quickly when you feel wronged or slighted.
And that's the nature of the law,
Mhm.
in essence. I mean, one of the greatest depictions of this that I've ever read about or witnessed is in the story of Les Miserables.
Mhm.
Where Valjean was put in prison for stealing a loaf of bread. And no one really cared why he did that. And interestingly, we're seeing the same trouble with rigidity in our own judicial system. That's how, on the other end, which is too far, we've gone too far. Where in some of the Western states, you see, like if somebody robs from a store, you don't know why they did that. You don't know what their plight in life is, so they're not going to be criminalized for it, even though it's a criminal act.
Mhm.
And so they put further parameters around that and said, if they don't steal something that's worth over $900, then they're not going to be incarcerated and, put into the justice system. But that's kind of an overstretch on the other side of, I think what it says is, becoming a vice through excess. Anyway, or whatever it mentions here about something with trustworthiness. But what I'm pointing out here is not that directly, but a reference to why we're seeing so much trouble, especially from the younger generations of the world right now. They don't know how to understand the balance here between, the relationships and justice. And so there's a lot of revolt happening in the sense of the rigidity of the law without the context of the life. And you can't go to either extreme. There's a balance that needs to be there.
There was a fruit of solitude, and I'm not quite able to remember the exact wording, but it was on justice. And it was that justice should be impartial, but not, and this is the word I can't remember, but it's something along the lines of justice should be impartial, but not apathetic. And,
Apathetic?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think of that in this sort of context, where I think the demerit of having a justice system in the first place is it's always going to lack the context of a relationship. I think having any formalized system where a group of strangers or whatever else, a group of laws, is going to judge an individual on this standard and have no context into the crime or anything like that is always going to miss the mark, because it's something that's been a repeating motif that's come up for me, of a sword that cuts blindly. It just hurts. I don't think it actually does good. And I see that a lot with our justice system, and I've been to several prisons and talked to several ex-convicts, and I mean, the repeated offense thing is how our system is designed. There is very little restoration that happens there. If anything, it's almost meant to keep you in that system. It's tragic.
And what we're not looking is the roots of why those things come to be what they are.
Mm-hmm.
And what you will find in some of the major disparities of life, homelessness, criminality, substance abuse, lascivious living, all of those things are actually rooted, or a lack or loss of identity are all rooted in a breaking up of the fundamental relationships of life.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where we see some of the agendas of the day that are not from men, they're from a power outside of man's, but they directly have an influence on man. And that is to undermine and to break apart those fundamental relationships. First between man and his creator, and what that relationship has become, which is father-son. So therefore, in the earthly realm, the next high level of attack is going to be in the home.
I think of specifically with the relation to the father and the son here. I think the example used is very funny because of the Analect we went over not too long ago about how a child ought to correct their parent, if you recall. I just think that the difference between the two there is very poignant, because I think the impartial swing of justice that is seen in this Analect compared to that one, I think is intentionally painting two different pictures. One in which I think that in the context of relationship, that reprimanding actually has substance, whereas I think the other is punishment for the sake of punishment.
Well, there's kind of two different scenarios implied there. The previous Analect that you're referencing is more like an attempt on a son's part to convey that there's something that needs to be changed about the way of life,
Mm-hmm.
how you do things. And their parent may or may not be receptive to that. So,
Mm-hmm.
He says once or twice, but then you let it go,
Mm-hmm.
in essence. And this is more of a circumstantial wrong, that is committed, where, you have, then you have a different scenario where, like, oh, are you like, Upright Gong, who immediately goes to the authorities and says, you're something, like, it's a very, like, communist,
Yeah.
fascist type of feel of justice, versus there's a relationship here, and I can approach that person. There's still an approach that says, that is a confrontation.
I guess that's my question is oftentimes with justice and punishment, it's what is the heart behind it? Because I think for many, you fall into one of two categories. You think that justice just is what it is because you are, I think that trustworthy word, you are overly rigid with the law. It just has to be that way because that's how it is. Or you are seeking justice and punishment as a way of expressing your own wrath on the person. You are thinking that there is no thought of the corrective measure of the punishment. You want that person to suffer because of the suffering they have caused you. And those are the two camps I see punishment in, for even large scale and small scale. I see that in the smallest in day-to-day interactions with why someone deserves something because they did something, and in these large-scale justice system swings. It very much always seems like this person did something awful, so something awful deserves to happen to them, or this person broke the law says this happens, therefore this is going to happen to you. And there is no even a remote thought of correction or a betterment, or I like what you said there, a change in the way of life. You know what I mean? Which I think is the whole point of punishment. If you are not punishing someone for the sake of trying to change their way of life for the better, then what's even the point?
It's not entirely true. I mean, in the fact that they do try to better people's lives in some ways. I mean, I've been in criminal justice class, but like I think they just have the wrong way of doing it, because like the goal is to rehabilitate people.
Is it?
But well, it is.
Well, but is it? Because they say it is, but think of the heart. Think of in any single scenario, even something as stupid as like if you, I don't know if any of you guys have watched like murder cases online or like these giant trials that they televise or whatnot, and you look at the comments from just people watching. I mean, that is never the heart that I see in anybody. It is there's
well, not for people who are like life sentenced. People who have a chance for more life.
But
I don't think. Well, and that's the thing. I don't think in our justice system, people who commit certain. I think we're kind of going off on something that doesn't even matter right now. But just
I'm not necessarily applying this to even the large scale things. I'm talking about. I think that this is a mindset in our day to day. As well. I think this applies big and small, and that's why I think it is substantial.
You know, that's justice without mercy in a certain sense. But I think even beyond justice without mercy, there's justice. You can't get rid of justice, but you can vie for looking ahead of your own seeking justice, or basically vengeance. Or what's the other word? Vindication for yourself is different than being restorative in the way that you think. Where there was a story about the two young men. One young guy was a basically gangster type of kid and did a gang killing, killed another young man who was delivering pizza just in cold blood. Not for any reason at all, didn't know him, but it was just so for initiation into the gang. And then the father of the son that was killed came to the court and, basically saw the young man as a young man and not only offered him forgiveness, but offered to be a part of his life, to honor the relationship that he had with his son. And to see the heart of the very misled young person who was seeking identity, who was seeking acceptance through all the wrong ways. And it really radically changed that young man's life. He was restored. Now, that doesn't mean that he didn't have that mark on his past and that would not have consequences. See, they will still bear the consequences of that, but you can bear the consequence and still have restoration. And while our criminal justice system does not at this point in time, and many do not, there are actually some countries who have very different criminal justice systems than ours, but ours is so overwhelmed that it doesn't even have the capacity. So honestly, this whole writing isn't about
what I was getting at, it wasn't even necessarily the punishment itself.
Mm-hmm.
My entire thing was, what is the context of punitive action regardless of consequence? What is the context? What is our hearts behind it? What I was trying to tie this into specifically, because I think applying it to large scale stuff is fine, but I think it lacks context in our day-to-day life. I was more of meaning this in the context of when we correct one another.
Yeah. Why do we do it?
Well, yeah, exactly.
Are we wanting to build someone up? That is a major consideration.
That's the entire point I was trying to make is why, when you are correcting someone, are you doing it because you feel hurt? Are you doing it from a place of this person is wrong and they need to know how they've wronged me? Or is it actually, I see this way of life, I see what's happening here, and I want to help them change? Because I feel like that is very often missed with punishment or with any sort of correction. I feel like it is either from a place of hurt or it is from a place of that's wrong and I'm going to correct you on it because that is wrong and that's not right.
Yeah. Well, so much of how that goes depends on the relationship that you have with the person.
And that's what I
So-
was saying is punishment in the context of a relationship.
Yeah.
Because I think outside of a relationship, it lacks any context or meaning.
Mhm.
Sorry, I know it's a little weird. That's the point I was trying to make. I still don't know if I'm expressing it
No,
the
it's
way
not
I'm
weird.
wanting to.
I understand it.
I understand.
Thank you. I only care so much just because that's something I've seen come up a lot in my being taught by the Lord just recently. So I think there's something substantial there that I'm probably not quite hitting on the head yet, but working towards it.
Any other thoughts? Obviously, the reference to what Confucius initially says, fathers cover up for the sons and sons cover up their fathers, is not just a reference to specific scenarios. It is a direct reference to a certain culture of how you handle relationships, how you do things. So there's definitely a cultural reference there, in the sense of there is a better way to. If you reread 1 Corinthians 13 in this context, then you can better understand that way. You know, love doesn't put itself first. It doesn't boast about itself. It's all of those attributes expressed. Holds no record of wrong, etc., etc. It is capable of superseding. Lady, how about you read 13:19 and Elijah, the second part of it.
Fancy asked about goodness. The master replied, when occupying your place, remain reverent. When performing public duties, be respectful. And when dealing with others, be dutiful. These are virtues that cannot be abandoned, even if you go to dwell among the ye or the barbarians.
Goodness is defined in terms of three lesser virtues. For the ye and the barbarians. See the commentary to 3.5 in contrast to the what is it?
Definitionalist.
Definitionalist passages such as 12.1, where goodness is understood in terms of ritual mastery. Here it appears as a character trait independent of Chinese culture. As Bastian remarks, even if you go to regions lacking ritual, such as those of the Yi and Di, these are still qualities that you cannot abandon nor fail to put to practice. There's a lot of references to this one.
I wonder what the contrast is of the barbarians that we're talking about in here?
The fundamental contrast is that even to call them barbarians basically means that they don't have a set culture by which that governs their way of life. They're kind of a wild people, every man for himself kind of scenario. And so the situation is, if you're occupying your place, which is to say, if you're coming into a place of influence in an area where there is no culture, in essence, then you can't be like they are. You still need to put down and practice the fundamentals of what goodness is and in relationship to others, especially by way of governance. So the whole principle of the leader exemplifies what the people are to become is not shifted at all based on the people that you are ministering to.
I think it's about holding a standard of life, no matter where you are, and not your own standard you set for yourself, but a standard you live on too.
Well, they have found that. So this is again Confucius looking back on the sage rulers and those good leaders of virtue who put certain ways of life and leadership into practice. So, and they bore good fruit. So there's an observation of this is what bears good fruit in the midst of people. This is what bears fruit in the governance of people. And so yes, there is a standard that is a direct parallel to the way of life that Jesus exemplified and taught about. And so that, as we have mentioned on other occasions before, those who followed Christ were initially called the people of the way. Those who follow the way. There was a way of life, a certain really relational culture. It had less to do with formal governance than it did with the governance of the inner man and of relationship to other people. And in essence, that would become and will become a healing salve to all the nations. All governments govern from the outside. Jaden, that's why there's such a punitive bent in our judicial systems and now even more so in our personal way of thinking. We think very legalistically, very rigidly. But there's a way of life that, in essence, renews from the inside out as a better way of governance, self-governance. And that's kind of one of the basic principles of everything that is taught in the Analects is self-betterment. But self-betterment doesn't mean what it means in the modern West, which is get in front of everybody else, do better for yourself, have the most stuff, live your best life now, pursue your own happiness at the expense of everyone else's. It actually diametrically opposes that idea and says, the betterment of self starts with self-discipline, starts with overcoming the things that in you that try to get above and over everyone else. You have to get over inside yourself first and then exemplify by way of life the victory over the lesser things, the base way of thinking of life, so that you can see something much, much greater. Reverence, respect, and duty. Noah, you're awful quiet today. Yeah.
My tummy hurts. Oh no. It's over.
They got him too.
No, it's not. I don't think it's part of the.
No, I was messing with you. You take your fish oil, you cannot falter. I appreciate you mentioning 1 Corinthians 13. That gives me a lot more context, I think, than what I was thinking. Love is the word I was missing in that whole conversation, ironically, because that's the thing I think that's lacking in everything, and that's why it's all wrong.
I was thinking of what we talked about last week
Mm-hmm.
when we were making that distinction between understanding and dutifulness, which
Mhm.
was as put in that one Analect, the one thread that weaves its way through all of Confucius' teachings. And just to give a bit of a recap, understanding being best summed in the phrase, don't do unto others what you would not have them do to you. So it's an ability to put oneself in another place, more or less, and then dutifulness being probably better understood as the full application of one's heart in a right sense of rightness, even though that sounds a little silly to say. And I'll clarify that by saying that there's a difference between uprightness, dutifulness, and responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
Responsibility being what one knows to be right according to, say, the state, or according to the law of one's law of one's land, country, society, or just the moral values held by one's circle, one's social circle, or culture even. That's the sense of responsibility. And dutifulness, especially considering that it's directly paired with something like understanding, is better thought of as the responsibility one has according to love, specifically, which sometimes can transcend or supersede those laws of one's land. And uprightness is the degree to which one applies oneself and walks in either of those things. And so sometimes you have a character like Upright Gong, who is outstanding in the sense that he's upright in his responsibility to the state. And he would even go so far as to report his father to the authorities. But that's a false application or practice of uprightness, as Confucius implies, because real uprightness, according to him, is the uprightness of dutifulness, which is always paired with love, which is always paired with understanding. I don't know why this came to my mind, but I cannot help but think of this in terms of what it means to be a king and a priest. They both walk in and exhibit and carry the standard of understanding and dutifulness, and both in their truest sense understand that love in the ultimate perspective of things does precede the law. In fact, it is what the universal law, if I can put it that way, is actually sourced from. God did not give the law to mankind from a place that did not come from love, as he is love. Not to conceptualize it too much. And again, we'd have to understand what love actually means there. Mm-hmm. But the shortcoming of the king, or the shortcoming that the king faces as opposed to the priest, is entering into that role as a way to promote or exercise selfish interest. So he
Take
in a
advantage
sense,
of your authority.
his person is his own greatest enemy.
Mm-hmm.
Someone like the priest, his greatest pitfall is the tendency to conceptualize things. Things become intellectual. So both can fall into the trap of what you could say is excessive uprightness. But the king does it from a place of selfish interest. The priest does it from a place of overly intellectualizing or conceptualizing things. In the sense that both are detached from reality, but for different reasons, and so both are harmful. To be able to fully walk out the role of a king, I won't say or, but the king and a priest, is to know what it is to grasp that single thread, which is understanding and dutifulness, and both absolutely are held together, woven together by love, which is the greatest of all virtues. It's not even limited to a mere virtue, I'd say. Anyways, I don't know if I've mentioned this one before, but this is probably my favorite Analect. This is 17.8, where the master addresses Zulu again, asking him, "Have you heard about the 6 virtuous words and their 6 corresponding vices?" Zulu replies, of course, that he has not, and he tells him to sit, because I will tell you about them. I won't read the commentary on this one for now. Loving goodness without balancing it with a love for learning will result in the vice of foolishness. Loving wisdom without balancing it with a love for learning will result in the vice of deviance. Loving trustworthiness without balancing it with a love for learning will result in the vice of harmful rigidity. Loving uprightness without balancing it with a love for learning will result in the vice of intolerance. Loving courage without balancing it with a love for learning will result in the vice of unruliness. Loving resoluteness without balancing it with a love for learning will result in the vice of willfulness. So I guess the next question would be, what is that love of learning? That love for learning?
It's a regulation of that self.
Emmanuel used to say it in this way. He said to be a student of life.
Thank you. This is very, very similar to what I was thinking. I think that's the thing that I was really trying to drive home, but for whatever reason I was not using the word love because it wasn't even coming to my mind. But that is the word I was trying to think of. It is definitely not in the worldly sense of the word, just because I think that love everyone concept is like, it's sweet and all, but it lacks any real context or depth. There is a different kind of love that I really appreciate mentioned in 1 Corinthians 13, but I really am thinking of the statement that God, punishes those who he loves. And I think that the way we view punishment outside of how God views punishment are two very different things. I think that the way we view punishment should above all be for a correction of a way of life, for an improvement and a betterment, not vengeance, not uprightness, not simply in adherence to the law. And I think it is expressed very well with that. Because I think another word for the love for learning could also just be love. right? It is the not holding on to anything so tightly, right? And I think that love allows you to do that, allows you to not be so concerned with what you think is right or wrong, not to be so concerned with what the law says is right or wrong. Love is a softer grip, still there, still very real, but it's not entirely unchanged. It is not harmfully rigid. It has a standard, and it upholds that standard, but that standard is not, I guess what I think of as like a wooden plank that snaps when you apply too much pressure to it. Like I think a lot of harmful rigidity is. Love is different.
The love for learning kind of reminds me of humility in a way,
Very much so.
because it's the balancing point for all of these, good virtues. But I think what that love for learning is like a constant understanding that, the definition of things can't be owned by you.
Yes. Yeah.
And that you are always able to grow in everything and to be taught, constantly. I don't think you ever find a place where any of these virtues within yourself is completed
Set.
or fully matured, but there's always, room for growth.
I'm very much reminded of the language the Bible uses with a lot of certain individuals throughout the Old Testament or New Testament too. I think of their hearts being hardened, and I think that is a very apt use of words.
Yeah.
Because I think that a hard heart is one of the most dangerous things you can have.
True.
I think that is what I think that is perfectly what you are expressing. That there is a yieldedness that we are meant to have to all of this. Because I think when you hold on to anything too tightly, your heart becomes hardened to it. There's so many words I want to use, but they just have like a different meaning that I don't want them to be taken that way. You know what I mean? But it's an open-mindedness in a way. And again, that word just
Like
has
a moldability.
A moldability. That is a much better way of putting it. Yes, a moldability. A knowing how to yield to the right things and to be steadfast in other things. But that differentiation between what you need to yield to and what you need to be steadfast in cannot come from you. It cannot come from your idea of, okay, I yield to this and I'm steadfast into this. It has to come from something beyond you. It has to come from an instruction from above, an instruction from love. It cannot come from your own idea of what is and is not good to yield to. Moldability, good word.
I think another word to consider there is adaptability.
Sure. That's the thing is I just think some words have connotations that I don't want to be taken the wrong way. But yes, absolutely. I think the thing with moldability, the reason I like that word is because it applies the context, or at least in my own mind, of like someone else or God determining the shape that takes, determining the, what would be the word, the texture of your heart in that way. Whereas adaptability, still, you can have this idea of your own self, your own thoughts of how you need to respond to certain situations. I think moldability implies that you are to be molded by him.
I don't think you don't need to compare the two against one another.
No, not at all.
One versus the other. The
Yeah.
adaptability is more about the life situation and relationship, and how if you are one who has as something to be added to a pliable, teachable, moldable spirit, giving you the capacity to adapt to any situation and learn from it. That's something that sets apart the love of learning from love itself. And so there's something that's very specific about the love of learning that is is probably merits more meditation and consideration throughout life. You know, that is not a concept that you learn and you say, oh yeah, I've heard of that, I know it. You know, it's something that it grows on itself. It expands. It's ever expanding. And so that is, I think, probably more closely tied to the Confucian ideal of what it means to be perfect and to live in a perfect manner. Because perfection in the Confucian context is not an achievement or an arrival.
It's a way.
It's a continuation. And so too is the love of learning. It has nothing to do with knowledge. It has to do with how you perceive, receive, and act on the various things that you encounter in life, whether that be from a knowledge standpoint or an experiential standpoint, or the combination of those in the context of relationship and various situations of life. So it makes you a whole man. Almost every principle by way of virtue that is mentioned throughout these writings, and even in the context of Scripture, all come into that same operation and work of the inner man. And yeah, it has to be fundamentally rooted in humility, contriteness, and selflessness, in which love supersedes all. But none of those things are left out, as if one alone, without the working operation, all of each one together, is not our whole pursuit. And what we find is that that's the outworking or the fuller expression of a divine life, a godly life. We pushed our time a little late, so we'll stop at 11:11. Esther, if you will close us in prayer.
Father, I thank you for these people that are seeking after you and desiring to learn your way and to follow your way. I pray that you would see the desire in them, in each one, to know you. I thank you for your perfect love that you are revealing to us. I pray that we will learn to love like you. Father, I also lift up those who aren't feeling well, that you would be with them, and that their hearts would also be with us here today. I thank you for all the things that you are doing. I pray that our hearts would be open to learn more of you every day, in every situation. We pray these things in your name. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.